ongoing drive for the perfect martini.
Yeah.
You should be thanked for this. Somebody's got to do it, right?
Yes. Well, I do the work so you don't have to.
Hello and welcome to episode 203 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. It's Saturday, the 3rd of February. I hope you've had a good week and you are well and you are staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truster. I'm not a rock star, but I'm a 3-time CMO and trusted marketing advisor. And with the help of my guests and chums, I share the marketing street knowledge that I hope will inspire your inner rock star. Come say hello. You can find links to me and my guests in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com or on LinkedIn at Rockstar CMO. And we are proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This week in the Marketing Studio, we did promise last week that we'd chat about RevOps, but Jeff Clark and I will be discussing a new B2B report from our chums at Metia before I wind down the week in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar with Robert Rose for a cocktail and a thought about using your flaws as a strength in marketing. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Right, it's time for my weekly marketing therapy session with Jeff Clark, our resident strategy advisor, former Forrester research director in the Rockstar CMO Marketing Studio.
Hello, Ian. How are you doing today? Come on in to our studio.
You see, you leave a pause. I always dive into that pause. I'm doing all right, mate. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm leaving pauses all over the place.
Yeah, because I'll jump into them. All right. So how are you doing this week, mate?
Doing well. As you typically start with our little weather report, we have a dull, gray, cold day here in New England. A little snow on the ground, but not the bright, shiny place that we're sort of we would like it to be. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, we've been the bright, shiny place today. It's been bright blue sky, crisp and cold. Great for long walks, just the way that I like it. It's been quite nice today. Cold,
awesome.
But still, I much prefer.
It is winter.
Sunshine. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get cracking with this week's topic. This week, thanks to one of my chums over at Metia. Metia are actually, for folks who don't know, they're a global marketing agency with offices in London, Seattle, Austin, and Singapore. And I like a full-service marketing agency that I've worked with in the past. And I've got a couple of chums over there. And one of those chums, Benedict Hum, he sent me over a copy of their latest report, the B2B Marketing Trends Report, which I'll, of course, include a link to in the show notes. And this report, they bring it out every year. And every year I kind of comment about it and share it on the socials. So it's really good. And obviously features some people that I know. For example, Misha, who we'll talk about, Misha Tramp, and Liz Hyde, both of them have been on the show before. And this report identifies 8 trends that every CMO should consider when we're looking at our marketing roadmap. And so there we are. We're doing a bit like what we did last week, where we're going to go through a trends report with this one by the Metia Group. So let's kick off with some highlights. Jeff, what say you, my friend?
I really I thank you for sending the report over, because it was chock full of interesting stuff. And Media does, in my experience, since I remember Liz and Misha from our past lives, is that they're really good at getting insights on what's going on there out in the world, in the market, from a variety of different types of sources. They were using social media monitoring and intelligence before it was hot.
Yeah.
So think that what I thought was interesting is that when you go through the 8 trends, I mean, a number of them were like, well, sure, generative AI will impact content creation, influencer marketing is big, blah, 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 blah. But there were 3 that I thought were interesting because they were, at least they came across as kind of different. Mm-hmm. Things that that when we go through the Forrester and Gartner and other analyst trends, things that you don't really see a lot. So I thought those are the ones that'd be interesting to pull out and give our listeners a taste of what Metia has to say about them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So which is the first one you've plucked out?
Well, the way they term it is behavioral science can help create long-lasting customer relationships. So this is from Metia Trump, who you introduced earlier. She's VP of Customer Experience Strategy and Insight, and she says customers increasingly demand messaging that aligns with their preferences and values, with more calls for personalized messaging and a growing desire to engage with brands that align with their values and personality. Now that statement itself might not seem to be something that we've talked about personalization a lot and its value to the customer, but the idea of using behavioral science to understand, what are the language in terms of like the vernacular, not necessarily just their, like their native language, but what's the language, their preferences, their needs. I mean, these are things that we talk about a lot, but the question is, how do you develop that? And she actually in the report, throws out a lot of statistics, some of which she's pulled from other sources, like 84% of B2B buyers are likely to choose a vendor who clearly understands business objectives. I think the emphasis there is on clearly understands. Yeah. 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver personalized interactions. That's probably not new. A high percentage get frustrated when that doesn't happen. So it gets in, the idea is that, how do you understand what's going to be relevant, what's going to help build trust, what's proactive. And when she digs into I was like, okay, behavioral science, I get it. I mean, I've heard research from other companies that talk about the importance of this. And what she gets into is, it's a lot about what we talk about in our knowledge fundamental of our 5 effing fundamentals of marketing. Mm-hmm. It's like do needs analysis research, do qualitative and quantitative research on who makes decisions, where do people go for information, what do they react to, what do they like, what are the types of interactions that they like to do, virtual versus in person. Testing stuff, I mean, she talks about testing nudges, which is, it's like, what can you put out there that gets somebody to go, oh, yeah, I think I like this company, or I think I'm going in the right direction. Yeah. And so, in many respects, a lot of the things that we talk about in knowledge is actually behavioral science. It's, and sometimes you're relying on other people who are doing the science, and sometimes you're doing it yourself. Yeah, no, I think, I'm hearing a lot more about behavioral science, and I think that we've used, and obviously both of us have known Metia for, over a decade, and she's always talked about this stuff, and primarily in B2C, but I think that it's super relevant in B2B right now, isn't it? And I think that's the slight difference, I think, right now, and that moment has come, I think. And it was like the stuff we were talking about last week, wasn't it? It ties back into how we need to demonstrate empathy with understand their needs very early in the process, right? So anyway, I love a bit of Metia, and as I mentioned, I worked with her at SDO and Tezu. And I what I also liked about her point in the report, and the one that I wanted to bring out there, was that she put it in context with AI. So whilst you're absolutely right, some of these 8 things that Metia pulled out were not all, they weren't all about fucking AI, which everybody else is talking about. But she was also talking about being authentic. And I think, to me, that we aren't really trying to be authentic
So she's talking about being authentic with AI, and if you use behavioral science, then you can be authentic. But I think that what we're trying to be is relevant and consistent. It isn't just about being authentic, right? And I think that, as she says, behavioral science ensures that the personalization facilitated by AI isn't just a technical exercise, but a means to authentically connect with customers. Behavioral science becomes the guiding force that humanizes AI-driven interactions, transforming data-driven insights into meaningful engagements, deeper relationships, right? A lot of wordy words there, but basically saying that you're going to use AI much better if you use a bit of behavioral science to drive it, I think was the basic element of what I got there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. It took me a while.
No, and it sounds complicated, but I think when you kind of boil it down to the various steps that we know we may need to take as marketers to understand our audience, it does become a little bit more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so what's your second point?
Second point is it's important to drive commercial growth with sustainability in mind. This is from Sean Donovan, VP of Global Accounts. He says, embracing sustainability is good for business that not only helps mitigate risks, but also fosters innovation, attracts conscientious customers, and secures financial investment. So the thing about this, and we've talked about sustainability and its role in marketing. We've talked about the demon of greenwashing and what Sean seems to be pulling out is that there's a bit of a transformation going on. Is that they see companies, and the B2B buyers and the conversations they're having. Actually, Leila said we investigated 13 million B2B digital conversations on this topic, and they see the shift away from greenwashing to establishing a much firmer, robust commitment to sustainability. And so I think, it's like socially people around the world are understanding, the importance of this, and buyers do want to know it. I think the challenge becomes for marketers is how do you tie that sustainability into the buyer needs, preferences, and motivations, kind of like we talked about in behavioral science. It can't be a side story. It can't be purely, it's like, we have the product and service you need. And by the way, all of our servers run on, a solar farm. You got to tie it in much tighter than that. So you got to define, what does sustainability mean for your buyer? What does it actually mean for your company? How do you articulate an offering that meets sustainable needs of the customer, if that's actually part of their needs, their preferences? And then how do you measure the sustainability goals, whether it's the goals that the customer will have by purchasing the product, or whether it's your own particular goals and you're kind of mirroring their concerns. Certainly, companies, or I should say B2B buyers, want to buy from companies that kind of reflect values that they have. So the value of sustainability could be part of the conversation, but I'm stressing tying it more into your understanding the buyer's needs and where that fits in the needs. And in some cases it may not fit in, but as this becomes a greater and greater issue, chances are it will become more and more part of your messaging.
There's a lot there, Jeff. a lot more than was in the notes.
Yeah, really. So, I didn't pause to let you chime in.
I mean, I agree. When I looked at this, and so I agree with the view, obviously, that of the shift in greenwashing to a more sustainability and being it's that authentic word again, which I think that authentic should actually mean being relevant and consistent, because I don't think any of us are really authentic. We're not, we're running a business, right? We're not being our authentic selves, but it's about being relevant and being consistent. But I also think there's something in here about the authenticity of this turning into things like accreditations, like we have ISO standards and that kind of stuff. So yep. So I can see us moving to a point where an organization needs to prove their sustainability, and it may become, if you're doing a government proposal or something like that, it becomes a trademark for doing that. But I did think this was a slightly weaker point in the report, and I know that we might end up debating this, about how helpful this is for the B2B buyer, because I think it's limited to specific vendors and buyers and particular situations. I don't think it's something everybody needs to jump onto, right? I don't think every vendor needs to consider this, because I'd worry about all the investment we put into marketing our sustainability credentials could be spent on something that's actually genuinely useful for the buyer if our buyer isn't that turned on by this, right? So if we're selling to a cause-based business or a buyer with these values, they probably get their fix of that content from other sources. So why are we telling them the cause-based stuff and the talking about principles? We should be telling them about how to run their business and how we help them run their business and how we help them with their marketing or whatever it is that with the gig that we're into, right? So I think that's an interesting thing. It was quite deep about the sustainability stuff, but I was thinking that maybe I don't. You might slightly disagree with this, but what do you think of that, Jeff? Do you think that maybe we need to be cautious about leaning in too far into sustainability, marketing our sustainability?
Well, again, it's got to be relevant to the buyer, which I think is exactly what you were just saying. And so if I'm selling, I don't know, trying to think of something off the top of my head, it's like if I'm selling some, fairly generic commodity that is not particularly, fossil fuel intensive, then sustainability is probably not, an issue. If I'm selling something that is helping make a company more efficient, less wasteful in terms of maybe physical or labor or other outputs, or is based on certain principles, like you mentioned, things like an ISO standard. So sometimes ISO standards are good because it's like if I have passed the standards, if I'm an ESG company, if I'm a those are like the good housekeeping seal of approval. It's like, okay, this must be a well-run company. So you really have to figure out, again, is this part of going back to our behavioral analysis? Is this part of something that is in the mind of the customer? If it's not, then then don't worry about it, except for its own sake. And if it is, then be sure how you weave that in to your story about what how you're addressing the needs of the customer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sustainability clearly something. There's a lot to be said on there. So my second pick would be from Liz High. So Liz High works with Misha over at Metia, and it's not also because she's a chum and she's been on the show. That's not why I'm picking her. But she outlines a 5-step plan for B2B influencer marketing, which I thought was it's hard to tie into the last point, which I tried to do. But I'd recommend folks take a look at that, because I think that in B2B, influence, we've been previously very good as a marketing industry in practice in B2B of influencer marketing, because we've always had to do analyst relations, that kind of stuff. But she had some good stats in that too, which sort of just ties back to what we were discussing last week in the importance of influencers in that early process before they get to know us. And we need to get into that conversation with the buyer earlier. So I would suggest people take a look at that. So on to your third one, Jeff.
My number 3 is partner marketing is critical to establishing more meaningful connections with customers. So David Brooks, who's the chief customer officer, says in recent years, sales departments have not seen their headcounts and levels of investment return to pre-pandemic levels. Buyer preferences are also shifting to technology partners that offer more value through a greater understanding of the solutions available to them from outside their core partner ecosystem. So, and that's a long sentence, but buyers are often relying more on the person they have the direct connection with, the vendor connection with, who may be connected to, they're providing products and services from a whole host of companies. He's in this one, as I go through their discussion, it is mostly focused on technology, which obviously is a very, an area that's rich in partner connections in terms of big vendors, like Dell's and IBM's and SAP's working with system integrators and distributors and consultants and things like that. But as I remember my work in many companies, most of which had a partner channel, is that, over 70% of businesses on the vendor side work through an indirect channel. As I said, distributors, ISV, consultants, system integrators. And they're the one that has the closest relationship. So, you really have to understand, because so often, particularly on this show, but so often in marketing in general, we really talk about things as if we have that direct relationship to the customer. And as it shows here, the stats say, well, many times we actually do not. So the challenge is that, how does my messaging play a role in defining the messaging that the partner is going to use? How can I train partners to become more well-rounded and essential consultants? How can I make sure that they're telling the story that I would? And oftentimes, I, as the larger vendor, may have the access to the resources to be able to do the behavioral science, to do all the things we were talking about, at the beginning of this discussion. So how can I translate that as information, content, assets, again, training, through to my partner community, so they can act like they have the knowledge of the customer. I mean, they have the relationship, but do they have the deeper knowledge that can help win the business over with the customer? And in the company I've been working with for the last 3 years, they had relationships with like Kaseya, Dell, ConnectWise, other reasonably large Nutanix. And many of those companies did an excellent job at providing content, training, campaigns, even, social posts, all these kinds of things that really help my client communicate, our understanding of the needs of the customer. And largely because with small companies, you don't have the resources to put a lot of that stuff together. So it was extremely helpful, and I think that's why this third one is a really important trend to dig into and to make sure you understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the partner channel has always been underrated. I think since when I was at Vignette at the turn of the millennium, I know some really good partner people even from back then, and again, I think with a lot of these findings, and maybe we're just attracted to these particular ones because of the conversation we had last week and this sort of idea that the funnel has changed, is that the buyer is doing a lot of their own research before they contact the vendor. And who's right there beside them while they're doing that research? It's their existing partners, it's their consulting partners, it's the people that are already in there doing the work, right? And they're likely to turn to them and say, what do you think of this thing that I'm thinking of doing? And so I think that leveraging that trusted relationship that your buyer has inside your channel is really important because they're doing that work. And I think as well in the Metia report, they talk about this sort of commercial extension of the sales team, which I think is absolutely right.
Absolutely right.
Which they share. And I think that you're absolutely right there, which is that I think some vendors kind of keep all the good stuff to themselves, don't they? And they don't think of the partner salesperson as a first class salesperson as they would their own salespeople. Do you know what I mean? That need to be enabled in exactly the same way and need to have all this stuff made easy for them in their marketing.
And I know the other challenge is that sometimes the small provider, that has the close relationship with the customer, they don't always trust the big vendor because, unfortunately, some big vendors have had a habit of stealing content or contacts away and then going direct, and it's like,
that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah, I mean
that is another podcast because it's important to make sure that the three-way relationship is maintained well and there's trust among all three: the customer, the distributor or the ISV or whatever, and then the larger vendor.
Well, it's funny because when you mentioned the word trust there, I was thinking that what the point you were going to make was that actually the buyer may trust the partner more than they would trust the vendor anyway, right? So you're going to need the partner to be on side to give you that credibility and trust for them to move forward with you as a vendor anyway, right? So, and it might be that they'll be like, well, if you say they're okay, then I'm in, right? Otherwise, I'm not sure about these guys, right? So I class partners in the channel in the same way as you would influencers and analysts. You've got to brief them, you've got to make sure that they know all the good stuff, make sure that they know what you're up to, make sure what direction you're going in, so they can support that stuff when it comes to engagement.
But sometimes it's so hard because each of the, like, if you think of the ecosystem and the vendor has all of these these relationships in the ecosystem, and it's like, and they have their own salespeople, so you not only need to get to the people that run those smaller companies, but you need to get to their sales force, and that's a big lift.
Well, also, I mean, I don't want to cast a shade on our sales cousins, but we all like an easier life, right? So if you can make it easier for the sales guy to sell, either through your sort of the air cover you provide through your brand, or by feeding them the materials and the good stuff and the lines they need to use and the emails they need to write, then you're going to have more success, aren't you, from that?
I don't think you're casting shade. You're empathizing with them.
What a hard job it is to be a salesperson. Absolutely. So that's just a couple of things we plucked out of this, and I'll obviously share a link to the report. There is a link on their homepage. It is gated, sadly. I know that last week we were triumphing. Tisk. But I think I can personally vouch for these guys. So I know personally at least 3 or 4 people that were actually mentioned in the report, and I also know the CEO. So they are nice guys, and they will look after your details in a good way. The report can be found at the Metia website, info.metia.com/Metia-2024-trends-report, or what will be much easier, just go to rockstarcmo.com, have a look at show notes, and I'll include a link there. And there are 8 conclusions and predictions in that report, and they're pretty good, so take a look. So that's our discussion. Another report this week, Jeff, and how do we conclude with this one from a song perspective? That's the next item on our agenda.
Well, we have to do the Venn diagram of what kind of fits the topic, So we're talking trends, fashions, what's hip, what's this, what's that, and then rock icons. So that's where the David Bowie and the song "Fashion" from 1980 kind of like came together in that Venn diagram. His tune is a little bit of a satirical look at fashion, but I think these trends are more than just the fashion of the day. They're the fashion for the near to midterm. Certainly,
I like that. And I'm never going to say no to playing Fashion by David Bowie. Absolute classic. So we'll play out with Fashion from David Bowie. And fairly importantly,
just as importantly, we'll be talking about anything interesting next week. Yes.
Yes. Will you be in the studio next week?
Yes.
Jolly good. And what if we agree? Well, yeah, we're going to talk about We're going
to talk about education as kind of a marketing tactic or strategy, however you want to phrase that. But the importance of it, we've talked about the importance of it, but let's talk about it as how you can be successful using it as a marketing tool.
Very good. Well, I hope the listeners got some education from this, and I shall see you next week, mate.
Good tie-in. See you.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye.
Dance, but I don't know its name. The people from bad homes do again and again. It's big and it's bland, full of tension and fear. They do it over there, but we don't do it here.
Thank you, Jeff. And that was, of course, a tiny bit of Fashion from David Bowie. And thanks again to our chums at Metia for the splendid report. I'll include a link to that in the show notes, which you can find at rockstarcmo.com. Right, it's that time of week to wind down in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and join the chief troublemaker at the Content Advisory, Robert Rose, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. What the heck is going on in here? What? You have turned this place into a farm. I see. chickens, horses, cattle. Are I don't know if you're doing this for food or for ranching or but it is just a full on farm in this bar. I mean, I'm very proud of you for repurposing it, but wow, the smell is something else. I mean, it's fascinating here. Indeed.
I don't know what to tell you, mate. It was just it was a whim. I thought, what's the most avant-garde bars these days? Well, they're farm bars, right?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Everybody's doing them. All the cool
The
kids.
farm
so
bar.
here we
That
go.
is true. That is true. The farm bar is really hot. That is really hot.
Starting a trend.
It is, and it's really that that sort of what is it, the sort of taste, that sort of smell, taste of the farm that really adds that ambiance that makes a farm bar, really.
Well, I got to tell you, the burgers are fresh.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, very good. Good. I like that.
So what are we drinking today?
We have a wonderful drink. And so very much like last week, we're going to go fancy again.
Fancy.
I've been experimenting with different types of martinis. And of course, I love to experiment with different gins and different vermouths. And different kinds of ingredients in a martini. And this one is not one that I've invented, but I did find it, and I found it fascinating. And it's called the Milady Martini. Hello, Milady.
Yes.
And it's Milady's Martini, and it's a little different. It's gin, of course, because it isn't in my humble opinion, it's not a martini if it's not gin. But I know some people are all into the vodka, but it is gin. It starts with gin, and then we have a rosé vermouth. So there are plenty of them out there, but if you can find a nice rosé vermouth, and then this was actually the ingredient that turned me on to this, because my parents used to be into Tio Pepe, right? The sherry.
Yeah.
And so they would come. My dad would come home from work, and he would have a Tio Pepe. He loved the Tio Pepes. And so I was like, oh yeah, I remember that with my dad. So I was looking for drinks with Tio Pepe, and I found this one, right? So there's gin, your rosé vermouth. So 2 parts gin, 1 part vermouth, 1 part Tio Pepe sherry. And then a very small quarter part, just a splash really, if you're only making 1 drink, Amaro Santoni. So one of your favorite Amaros, and then of course an olive if you need an olive in your martini, and then of course like a classic martini, a lemon peel, which might be expressed and then slid around the glass and all of that to get there. So you combine all of this into basically shake it all up and put it into a carafe. And what we've done here at the bar at our farm bar here is we've put it into a little carafe, the drink, and then put it into the freezer. Put it into the freezer for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And that gets it like just ice cold, of course. Yeah. And then you pour that into a chilled glass and put your olive in there, and you have yourself a Milady Martini, which was it ends up being a beautiful color, by the way. So there you go.
Yeah, I love it. And I love the work you do. Just for the rest of us, these experiments, this ongoing drive for the perfect martini. You should be thanked for this. Somebody's got to do it, right? It's tough.
Well, I do the work so you don't have to. Basically,
well, this is
it is arduous work, I will tell you. But
where shall we be taking these miladies?
I think it doesn't it feel French? Doesn't it feel like we should be in France for this?
Yes.
And specifically the south of France, it feels like that we should be in the south of France, somewhere on, I'm always partial to the coast, but, maybe Cannes, maybe around Cannes. I'm not that familiar with that part of France. But somewhere small in a cafe, having these Milady martinis, sunny day, south of France sounds like a good place to be.
Yes. And I also know Milady would love to be taken to the south of France. So,
Yes.
so when we're done, I'll have to bring her. But yes, and then we're the south of France. The sun is shining. We're drinking these Miladies, and the topic turns to marketing. What are we talking about this week, Robert?
Well, we're going to talk about our flaws as a brand.
Oh dear.
And and why a flaw is really our strength, especially, especially as we move into 2024 and brands and leaning into our brand, the humanness of our brand, with generative AI and everything that's going on, the way that we're going to lean into our brand as a human driven, and why the flaws are such an important part of that, and how that fits into our messaging. And so it's not a question of if, it's always a question of when our brand is going to not do something the right way, right? Where we're either going to behave badly as a brand, or where we're going to make an earnest or honest mistake and people are going to be, upset with us. You can see Elon Musk, of course, arguably been purposely acting out on the brand of Twitter, which is now X, of course. Bud Light had their famous brand challenge last year with a, call it honest or earnest mistake of trying to go out without really thinking about it. Even OpenAI last year, right, had a bit of a brand hit when they had their whole drama behind Sam Altman and the CEO and all those kinds of things. But the thing is, we're never going to avoid those things, independent of who we are, because guess what? Brands are made up of people, and people make mistakes, and people do bad things, and every one of our brands will falter at some point. Now, the interesting thing here is that as humans, there's a really interesting cognitive bias and attribution error that we make, which is we're always really clear about the intentions behind any of our actions, whether or not it's for ill or for honest and we make a mistake, but our intentions are always really clear to us, but they're not to others, right? So when we look at others, we always ascribe some level of malice to it, right? And so the interesting thing is that we know this inherently with people, and so our guilt over doing something mistakenly, or if in many cases where we do it purposely, we can double down on the response on some sort of pushback that we get, or and so the classic example of this is you accidentally cut off a car in traffic, and then that person roars up beside you and flips you the bird and is screaming at us from inside the car. And you don't apologize. Your immediate reaction is to double down and flip them the bird back and go, "Shut up! I didn't do it on purpose." And you get mad at them, right?
Yeah.
And so, as on a business side, the example of that is, we know we've been working super hard on that email campaign for customer enablement, and we've been working really hard, and then somebody sends it out prematurely with a big typo or a big mistake, or one of the personalization fields didn't get filled in, and then we get called out on it on social media, and the immediate reaction is to sometimes react really badly and further inflaming the thing. The Bud Light example is a perfect example of this, right? Yeah. Their biggest brand mistake wasn't in doing the LGBTQ campaign that they did. It was the response that they had to doing the LGBTQ and the pushback that they got. Yeah. So the thing is, when things go wrong, we're very likely to blame the situation and remind ourselves of our intentions, whatever they were. But what they need to what we need to be able to plan for and think through is a much more cohesive and basically really coordinated response. In other words, we need to know that we're going to make these mistakes, and we need to have messaging and a story and a conscious desire to want to respond in the right way, right? We all know that every great hero, every great brand, every great hero has a dark side, right? Luke Skywalker has a dark side. Barbie lacks self-awareness in some cases. George Bailey, even from It's a Wonderful Life, he's a perfect father and brother, but he's got self-worth issues. So we all know that great brands and great heroes from stories, they all have flaws. So we need to know what ours are. Yeah. A great example of this might be, we're going to come out strong for for example, I worked with one company. They were they're a consulting firm, global consulting firm, and they're with their brand. They're coming out with a strong opinion about cloud computing and what they want to do with cloud computing and all that kind of stuff. And the real flaw, though, is they themselves don't really do a lot of cloud computing,
Right.
and so they're very aware of that. Now, that doesn't, just because they don't have they haven't lived up to the dream yet, doesn't mean they can't espouse themselves as the dream. The key of all of this is getting to what we've talked about on this show before in terms of brand and storytelling, which we call a point of view messaging architecture,
Yes.
which is understanding what the brand believes and where its flaws are as part of our message, consistent storytelling, consistent messaging, etc. It's an internal messaging architecture. But for example, when we worked with that global consulting firm and their point of view architecture, basically they knew that they weren't living up to that dream. They knew that they might get called out on it. It's not that they're going to proactively go, by the way, we're not living up to the dream, but they basically knew that they might get called out on it. And so they had a consistent and cohesive message aligned response if it were to happen.
Right.
And so now they can admit that they're flawed, admit that they're, that they're working on it, and have a response that is going to be not flipping them the bird if they get called out on it. And so as marketers, as the storytellers in the business, it is our purview to look at our flawed brand character, understand what they are, and recognize them, that they can be strengths, that these can be strengths as we tell our story, because they are more human. They do set us up to be heroes, and we can tell a much more powerful story if we say we're part of the journey with our customers. So that's the real key.
Yeah, and I like this. And also, I think it's beyond those mistakes as well, isn't it? I mean, the problem, I think a lot of, both of us tend to work in B2B. A lot of B2B organizations have very undifferentiated messaging, partially because they're all trying to tick all the same boxes, right? Whereas for the buyer, they want to see those flaws. They want to see what's good, what's bad about each of the vendors they're making choice.
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's right.
some-
Well, and I would say we spend so much time in brand messaging talking about the idealized, right? The idealized nature.
Yeah.
And never talking about anything that's conflicting or our own weaknesses or our own ability or inability to do certain things, or our own maturity level when it comes to whatever it is we're going out with.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is we end up making one of two mistakes. The first mistake is we go, we can't live up to that, so therefore let's not do it. So therefore we come across as boring or behind the times or whatever, simply because we just don't want to deal with the pushback against that, right? Or two, we go out with it sort of Pollyanna or sort of naively sort of saying, yeah, this is our dream and we're living the idealized, la, 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 la. And we never recognize that until we get called out for it. And then we get caught with our pants down, right? Like Bud Light did, right? In other words, they didn't take the time to understand as a marketing and a messaging and a strategy to say, somebody is going to call us out on this because we're not perfect here. And so what's going to happen when that happens? And we need to agree as a business how we are going to respond, or quite honestly, not respond. One of my favorite examples of this is Sesame Street. So Sesame Street, during the exact same time that Bud Light went out with their brand of the LGBTQ community, did the exact same thing, right? They had the Sesame Street characters celebrating gay pride, and they had the Sesame Street characters with the gay flag and all sorts of things, right? And they got called out on it. And basically, you could see by their non-response and their responses that they had figured this out. They knew that was coming. They knew that was going to be one of the results, and they were completely aligned and cohesive in their response. Nobody threw anybody under the bus. Nobody got mad. Nobody responded in an irresponsible way. They just, where they were, where they could suck oxygen out of the room of the messaging. In other words, not responding. They didn't respond. And where they needed to respond, they basically said, no, this is what we are. This is what we are. If you don't like it, too bad.
And also, I think And I know that, I'm keep trying to bring this down to the more sort of duller sort of B2B marketing, but I think that this kind of thing and exposing your flaws, being honest about who you are and what you're not, actually builds trust. And I think that trust, it's like being a consultant. And once a client trusts you, they'll ask you to do things maybe you're not as qualified to do as another consultant, but because they trust you and you've admitted your flaws, they still want your help, right? And it's same with any sort of B2B transaction. That trust is huge, isn't it? And you get that trust through sharing these problems, don't you?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, splendid. All right, so if we're looking for flaws in somebody's web presence,
Oh dear, boy, this is a tenuous one. Okay, keep going.
they're getting worse. I'm sorry, mate. I'm going to have to start preparing better. Although, in my defence, I never know what you're going to talk about, so I have to think of the segue on the fly. So, where might people find other content just like this that's unflawed?
You'll find it at our ever-evolving website, contentadvisory.net.
Splendid. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you, my friend?
You'll find me mostly on LinkedIn these days, and would love to connect with everybody there, of course.
Excellent. And for my selfish in-person enjoyment, will you be in the bar next week?
Of course I will.
I look forward to seeing you there.
Hopefully with a little less scent ambiance.
Yeah, it's going to take me all weekend to clean this out, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks, then. I'll speak to you next week. Thank you, Robert. And if you're new to the show, I have no idea what Robert will spring on me as the theme for the bar. So there you have it this week, Flaws on a Farm. So that's a wrap on episode 203 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Jeff and Robert for sharing their insight. You can find links to us, our work, and all the things we discussed in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. And thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. I'd love to hear from you, so please say hello or drop us a rating or review at your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Jeff and I will be chatting about education in your content marketing, and Robert will be back in the virtual bar with a fresh marketing thought. Until then, have a great week, and I hope you again join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.